he's got some topics on the tariffs as well. Steve Laffey, good morning, sir. Welcome in.
Jimmy, great show. Great to talk to you.
Good to talk to me. I asked you some questions about tariffs because I've heard people that critique the tariffs and defended them. And one of the things that the critics of these tariffs say is it's an impossible task. Manufacturing will always be dead in America, where Americans aren't going to make tennis shoes, they're not going to make T-shirts, and so why are we doing this? And they poo-poo the fact that manufacturing is something that Americans are really interested in, and they don't see it's a big deal. Trump says, hey, we need manufacturing base back here. Stop depending on China, but some of the critics say, no, we don't, and we can't get it here. They say the unemployment rate, we don't have enough employees.
These are my New Balance tennis shoes. They're made in America. You mentioned, there they are.
Yeah.
All right. So to backtrack just theoretically and whatever, the truth is, yes, we can manufacture a lot more in America. It is because of communist China, and I made a movie about it. We've talked about it, you and I, for over 10 years, that they are the primary driver of destroying towns all throughout the Midwest, and everybody knew it. That's why in 2015 I said Trump will win the election. People, maybe even you, thought I was nuts. He did, because he was talking about China. He did nothing about it. But yes, we can raise the manufacturing base of America a lot. No problem. You just need some time. We have a North America Free Trade Agreement, which Trump signed off on the second time around, which really allows, to be simplifying again, cheaper stuff like aluminum we've talked about the last couple of weeks to come into our country because they make it cheaper and we don't have the wherewithal, the permitting process. Can you imagine if someone in Colorado, in Fort Collins, said, I'm going to build a giant aluminum factory? Do you imagine what it would take, how many years, and so forth? So that's a good thing. And so we have to also think about the law of comparative advantage. If someone can make it a lot cheaper, great. The tie and people know me for this. I just showed you the sneakers I'm about to put on when I leave the show in a couple hours to work out. This tie's made in Vermont, but they didn't make the cotton in Vermont, right? They can't. They assemble it, right? The shirt I've got on, it was made in Seattle, Gitman Brothers, but they didn't make the cotton. So we can't deny and try to become like North Korea, what they call an autarky, which means you make everything in your house and people end up eating grass, right? Everything in the country. So yes, of course we can. The problem that's going on today is, one, Trump took on all countries in the world at once. Bad idea. We're $30 trillion of GDP. The rest of the world is 80 some odd trillion dollars. The world is bigger than us, right? I said take on communist China to you for 10 years, give it a number of years, raise the tariffs, and then pass laws, which here's the problem. Donald Trump refuses to go to the legislature. This is why this is not going to work. You go to the legislature and you say, we want 60% of all, name it, chips to be made in at least North America, and the federal government 5 years from now will buy only chips made in America to get this. So now they know they're going to buy it. Intel's going to buy it. You have to give them money. We are the richest country in the world. But President Trump, and the quote is somewhere here, it's somewhere on my desk, I can't find it now. His quote is that any trade deficit with any single country is bad. That is preposterous. There's nobody who believes that. So write down some of jot down some of the reasons we would have trade deficits. One, we have been the world's reserve currency and the richest country in the world, and we've been growing faster than, say, Europe. Just by that, we'd have a trade deficit with them because we've got a lot of rich people trying to buy stuff. Not all of it should be made in America because we don't grow blueberries in January for the most part, to be simple again, right? Yeah. So the thought process that some of this manufacturing would come back to America, like we're going to have some sweatshops set up in Worcester, Mass., and they're going to make some T-shirts. I just showed you a New Balance sneaker. It's a very high-end sneaker, right? It does cost more, as people would know. Hickey Freeman, for example, I still wear Hickey Freeman suits. I bought them as cheap as I could. They cost more than buying the one at the local place made in China. If people started doing this, we can make more stuff here. But I'll give you an example. The really high-end engines that come out of like a Porsche, they're made in Germany. The really low-end engines or Cobra, whatever, they're made in China. The middle ones are made in Mexico. Can we make some of the high-end stuff in America? Yes, we have people that can do this. but they need 3 years to make the transition. And we don't, and President Trump, unfortunately, folks, has not given you 3 years. I mean, this morning, he's going to raise the import tariffs on pharmaceuticals, which you and I have talked about for 10 years, right? So all that was needed 10 years ago, not when Trump was president, or 8 years ago, or 6 years ago, was a 5-year time frame to say, America is going to buy pharmaceuticals made in North America to start with, and 60% of that's going to be made in America. In San Juan in Puerto Rico, that's where a lot of these were made years ago. They still have the factories. I know it's not exactly America, but we can do a lot of this. In Cody, Wyoming, this empty factory making pharmaceuticals empty. We can do a lot of it. We just needed time. And Trump, unfortunately, with his narcissism, is now lashing out. He's lashing out at people who are trying to save their congressional jobs next year. And where are they going to come from, Jimmy? They're going to come from Senator Ted Cruz in Texas, because he's worried, because we do a lot of trade with Mexico. They're going to come from the northern part of our country, where there's some conservative people dealing with Canada, because people are and by the way, are starting to lose their jobs. Delta this morning said what? Delta reported earnings. They see I'm going to paraphrase the CEO. He doesn't want to say exactly this way. He sees a recession now. So this is terrible stuff, the way that Trump is handling it. The sycophants around him are saying, by the way, Scott Bessemer this morning, I watched it live. He said the problem with China, if they would stop their fentanyl. They went back to fentanyl this morning.
I saw the list now. They say that there's a 25% fentanyl fee, and then a 25% they've line itemed how they're breaking down these numbers.
I mean, the U.S. Treasury Secretary has said that they put to death drug traffickers within China, which they do. He thinks they need to do it for the people who send it to us. Now, remember, this is the other fallacy of what Trump doesn't realize. People with dictatorships couldn't care less what we say. You and I have talked about it again for years. Putin doesn't care. He plays the game. He's not stopping. He's just going to keep going until he takes all of Eastern Europe back if he can. China wants Taiwan. They've stated, it's written down. They want to be the world superpower. They want to put the United States out of business. They'll take a long view to do so. They'll help Iran. North Korea is doing all they can by sending soldiers into Ukraine. The difference between those people and, say, France is that you can deal with France like you can a city council person, right? You can get them in a headlock and say, here's what we're doing, all right? You can cajole them. You can have drinks with them. You can do whatever to get them to see your way. The Chinese is a dictatorship. They couldn't care less. They will make their people eat grass before they agree with Donald Trump. So this is a really bad situation. And the thing that I talked to you about in January, about a weaker dollar coming, the euro went from 103 to 110. The Swiss franc went from par to 117. The yen is stronger versus the dollar, is reducing our wealth. It's happening in front of us. And along the way, what people are surprised about, but what I told you not to be surprised about, is that real interest rates would go higher. And we just saw the biggest sell-off in the last 24 hours of 10-year treasuries that we've seen in years as a percentage basis, when Trump is putting more tariffs on, which should slow growth. That ought to have everybody's ears on fire. Because if you hit 5% on the U.S. Treasury when inflation is actually coming down, it has to, because the price of oil is coming down dramatically, right? And that feeds into everything. So with higher rates, we are having a recession. It's over. And
go ahead. Steve Laffey, by the way, since we're now switching, and this will also be available on podcast if you're just listening. That is Steve Laffey, Laffey. His website, stevelaffey.com, stevelaffey.com. And I got to remember, now that we're going to do the show live here in video, but later out the day, it'll be every podcast platform. Steve Laffey, his website, stevelaffey.com. Steve, it is amazing. You talk about Congress and Congress not doing anything, or Trump not using Congress. We've been talking ever since the COVID crisis, if you will. We've been talking about how much of our pharmaceuticals are coming in from China. Right. This isn't a supply chain. This is a lifeline. Yeah. We've talked about the ability to manufacture ships, and China's producing ships all the time. These are things that, these industries maybe needed more time, but they've had a hell of a lot of time, and they've not done it. Nobody's done anything about it. We've kvetched about the Chinese, but the Congress has not passed any law under Biden or Trump, right, to force that to happen. That That's a national. Some of these are national security issues.
Yeah, and the blame goes to every president, every member of Congress since the year 2000 when they allowed China to go into the World Trade Organization. If they hadn't, we wouldn't have these problems. You cannot let somebody like China, because they have no females. Remember, they abort them, right? They got to keep their young people working. They won't. No one will have children anymore in China. They're a demographic disaster, right? But along the way, they become less of a democracy, like I said many years ago, in disagreement with all the super rich, very powerful people who ran all the companies and said, we've got to give them a good trade deal. They'll be a democracy. Never happened. So they were wrong. Where do we go to punish them? Like, why are they still in the news saying something new? So this is a terrible situation. And unfortunately, Donald Trump, if he had started and just done the great stuff on immigration, stuck with deregulation, only went after China by, like, let's say, like I've said, raised tariffs to 10%, then 20, then 30, and then pass laws with the Congress that we need this stuff, pharmaceutical stuff in North America, right? We need this stuff, rare earth minerals, which China today stopped sending to our country. Okay, so we need this stuff. Shipbuilding. Let's get together with our allies. Where are we going to build some more submarines? Where are we going to build more ships? Who are we going to integrate with? None of this had to happen with China and Mexico till, say, next year. And I'll give you another example. A tariff is simply a tax. It's not a lowering taxes, but at least it's a partially paid for by foreigners. So if he had done a 10% tariff on everybody and declared victory in January on his day of inauguration, not many people would have done anything. He would have collected more revenue. Now, it's so high and so dramatic that people are finding different supply chains. Not tomorrow, but over the next year. And they decided to never deal with America again. This morning, the president of France, an ally, comes over, smiles, everybody, Macron. He's like, no more investment in America. He just told companies, no more investment in America. That can't be a good thing, folks.
Let me ask you a question. Because, again, you're well educated, a Harvard business guy. And a lot of folks just watching television, they're armchair quarterbacking, and everybody forms an opinion. A lot of their uneducated opinions, but they're doing their best.
Yeah.
The average person, though, hears that Europe charges our automobile factories 4 times higher of a tariff than we charge imports coming in. And people say, well, what's wrong with charging the same? You're going to charge us 40%? We'll charge you 40%. Why are we only charging you 10? You charge us 40. And some people say it's a leveling of the playing field. I'm guessing you would say it's not that simple.
No, well, that's not what we're doing. If indeed you wanted reciprocal tariffs on a country that equalized manufacturing of cars with each other, and they pick a country, charge us 40% for a car coming in from our country, and we charge them nothing, then put a 40% tariff on the cars. Okay. That's not what he's doing. There is a cockamamie, disastrous formula that I tried to find through AI. My friends who are economists. Remember, I hang around with people who are actually economists, right? Through anywhere I could find that you would use a formula of taking the amount of deficit of imports, divide that by the total imports, and then magically divide by 2, not 3, not 1, not 2.5, not pi 3.1415, not any. Just do that. There's nobody in the world I have found who can defend that. Now, when I say not one person, now the administration says it came from a think tank within the White House. It's always been used. It's very normal. I can't find, so they're a bunch of liars. There's no need to lie about it. They had to come up with a formula. They made it up. Just say we made it up.
But Steve Lavi's at home trying to back engineer the Trump formula. This doesn't make any sense.
But there's not a single person you can find on Fox News. You can't find anybody who would say that it's a normal formula. It makes any sense.
Yeah.
But yes, so listen, we can have a trade deficit. Let's say we have a trade deficit with the UK. Let's say it's with France. And let's say part of it's due to non-trade barriers. And France is well known, famous for non-trade barriers. I'll give you an example. Back in the day, this is a long time ago, when Japanese cars started coming into the market, and we let them erroneously come into our country with no manufacturing in our country until the Plaza Accords under Reagan, and Reagan changed that without destroying the world. He just changed it, right? So Toyotas are made here, Subarus are made here, blah, blah, blah. France didn't do anything, but their non-trade barriers were like this. And I'll be a little bit hyperbolic. A little old lady sits at the dock, and she has to process every car coming in for Japan. She can only do 3 a day. That's a true story. There was no trade barrier. They just had to have a lady. There was a lady, and she was sitting there, and that's so 3 a day. So they didn't have to have. So that is a problem. That is one big problem. Let's deal with it, right? But
the voice of Steve Lavin. Steve, one more quick question.
Yeah.
Again, I've been watching the frenzy all around me on
Yeah.
all the cable channels and business news. One of the arguments I heard somebody say, we can, some manufacturing you need to get here, pharmaceuticals are fine, but this whole thing about shoes and shirts and little trinkets at the store, Americans are not wanting, and they don't care enough to have to pay high prices. Well, what about the human rights issues with the Uyghurs in China? Doesn't matter. Americans like their cheap stuff and their dollar item goods. What's your thought of that?
well, my thought is that the president gets on and explains to him that the Uyghurs are in concentration camps and shows the fences and the electric fences and shows what's happening to people and says, we have a real problem. And here's what we're going to do about it. And we're going to raise tariffs until they become a democracy. And eventually we're not going to trade with them. And a lot of this manufacturing will have to go to, some of it will initially go to Vietnam. Some of it will go here. Some of it will, folks, I would say, will not come back to America because we're not going to have this kind of pollution to make certain things. But the higher end stuff and a concerted effort of making enough so that if there is a war to be fought, number one, we can make all of it. Big diesel engines, which we really don't make, right? We assemble, we don't really make. We can do a lot of that stuff. But it just takes several years. I mean, the ultimate example I gave you guys a couple of weeks ago is that it would take 8 years to build an aluminum smelting plant in our country to get it going, and it would be higher cost than what comes in from Canada. The other real problem is when these tariffs now are hitting is that many products, when it comes to, say, some of these industries, go back and forth across borders, Canada, Mexico, before they're actually assembled. And that the tax is going to be paid every which way. So if indeed the President of the United States doesn't find an off-ramp on this and declare victory, 3 weeks from now, you will start to see the shortages and prices will be higher. Now, if he sucks it up and we do it for a couple of years, I guess people will stop building. But here's the other problem. Since he's changed his mind and people have added it up 85 times, that's the most recent thing about what I'll do, what I won't do, the 25, I could do this, I could do. It's a national emergency, but we can negotiate. Well, you don't negotiate national emergencies. So the problem is he has narcissism and he can't find an off-ramp. And he doesn't understand because he thought Z would back down the first time. Then he went to 100% on China 2 days ago and China came back at 84%. This stuff can't go on, or not only will we not have 3% economic growth, we'll have 3% negative growth. It feeds in also to the oil industry. Remember, Scott Bessent wants this is the stated goal of our administration, 3% growth in GDP, 3 million barrels of oil equivalents increased in our country, and 3% debt to GDP. I sent you over what I think it's going to be. It's going to be -2 growth if they go this way. It's going to be 0 or less because oil production is going down in this country today, which means people are going to get laid off in Midland, Texas pretty soon. And it's going to be a 9% debt to GDP, which is why interest rates, when the Fed cut interest rates, and at that time, the 10-year yield was 3.67. Today, it's 4.45. They should go down. They went up because the bond vigilance. And here's what's actually going to happen if we don't have an off-ramp. We're going to have a crisis in the bond market, and the bond vigilantes will speak.